This is Dave Douglas for Greenleaf Music and A Noise from the Deep, the podcast on music and musicians. As always, you can email me and find out more at greenleafmusic.com. And that's the music of soprano saxophonist Sam Newsome. His new album, Chaos Theory, furthers his many years of amazingly creative work as a solo soprano saxophonist. Sam has a thoughtful and incisive Twitter feed on art, music, creativity, and life, I suppose. And though we go back quite a long way, we have not played together in many years. Sam said some things that got me thinking in new ways about some music that I know, or that I thought I knew. After hearing Sam and reading his observations, I can say that even though every artist I've spoken to creates in a different way, the one common denominator seems to be courage, where you make creative life decisions that lead to discovery and invention, a willingness to take a stand, to risk, to decide for oneself how to practice, and to follow through despite whatever challenges and obstacles come along. That's what strikes me about all the guests I've spoken to in the musical arts, and I'm hoping to make many more of these episodes, not just to leave a record, though there is that, but also to validate the idea that artists make the most difficult decisions every day, and that the results of that courage are found in the stunning outpouring of creative music, and that the many different kinds of creative music are validated by those daring creative choices in and of themselves. So, Sam Newsome, enjoy. These podcasts are free. They're available wherever you get your podcasts, and we do hope you'll come and see what's happening and become a supporter at greenleafmusic.com. Thanks for listening. Yeah, thank you for doing this, Sam.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to your home, Greenleaf Estates.
Man, yeah, Greenleaf Arms, we like to say. Wow. So I haven't seen you in a long time, but I met you in probably, well, I'm going to say the year, and then it's going to date us both. So late 80s, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. I remember. I think we had a conversation about this, but I think it was at Bruce Barth's place in late 80s when he was living in Park Slope.
Right.
I can't remember who was playing. I kind of remember.
Probably James Genus.
James Genus. I think it was Gene Jackson.
Oh, wow.
On drums. Of course, Bruce. I think you.
So your music has changed a lot over that. I guess mine has too.
Yeah.
Everybody's.
Yeah, I don't even play the same instrument.
You were playing tenor then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to dive right in then on the soprano saxophone.
Okay.
You know, you've now dedicated multiple albums to it, and this new record, we were just listening to some of Chaos Theory, the first piece, Brewing, and you show a surprising dedication and allegiance to the soprano saxophone and to adding to the sound world that it can do. Was that a decision that you made, like from one day to the next, or how did you?
Yeah, I mean, my you might say my decision to become a soprano saxophonist was certainly not, you might say, love at first sight. I mean, because I remember when I first started playing it, I really didn't like it very much. That's because it was so difficult to play in tune. I mean, it was just hard to get any type of sonic clarity. And I think a lot of that stemmed from the fact that my setup on this tenor was so large that it was very difficult to find something that was comparable on the soprano. So I ended up always having a mouthpiece that was kind of too big and having a reed that was too stiff. So consequently, I just ended up forcing just a lot of air through the instrument. I think much more than maybe it's built for us. So, so the result was just not something desirable for me.
And this is when you were primarily a tenor saxophone
Yes.
player and you were adding the soprano as a double.
Exactly. Yeah, so it really wasn't until, and this was after I stopped playing with Terrence Blanchard's band, and I just had this period where I really wasn't doing a lot. And I remember I got called for a gig where they wanted me to play a lot of sopranos. So I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity that I can, get some stuff together on the instrument. So I practiced it for several weeks, and as I got into it, became more comfortable with it, I just started to notice certain things that I could hear on the soprano that I couldn't on the tenor. There was a certain, not only sonic clarity, but there's certainly a kind of musical clarity that I was able to get to that was very enticing. And then it actually got to the point where I was practicing both, and I actually couldn't wait to finish practicing the tenor so I can practice the soprano. Then after a while, I just stopped picking up the tenor again.
Huh.
Yeah, just sort of. I mean, I was at that age too. I know when you are, I don't know, when you're approaching 30, it's kind of a unique time because it's really a kind of a crossroads where you're moving from a young person to really being an adult. You can kind of, in your early 20s, you can kind of get away with the persona of being sort of like a big kid or kind of a young person. But when you're approaching 30s, it's like, okay, you're really in adulthood. So I just felt like, also, I wanted to have a stronger sense of purpose sort of going into my 30s. And also, I felt there was something there that I wanted to explore. And I felt, well, if I didn't do it then, I was never going to do it. And when I say do it, I mean put the tenor saxophone down and just make a commitment to only playing the soprano.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was like a little speechless a moment ago because like the level to which you're committed to solo saxophone with the soprano right now is so intense that I sort of anticipated there would be some epiphany story where, and it just sounds like it was a gradual progression, not only from the tenor to the soprano, but also to solo performance.
Well, the solo stuff came much later. Because after I sort of made this commitment to being a soprano player, then the battle, then the uphill struggle began.
Right.
Because, of course, the same channels, musical circles that were available to me as a tenor player were not available to me as a soprano player. So I kind of had to find my own network of musicians.
Did you go through a period where you would turn down gigs because they wanted tenor and soprano? And you're like, I don't play tenor anymore.
Yeah, and that was very difficult.
Yeah.
A lot of folks were very angry at me, I think because they actually liked what I was doing. So I think they were just very disappointed that they weren't going to be able to hire me to add to whatever I was adding to their music.
Well, it's a intense choice. I mean,
And I, until this day, I still can't explain it. It's just something. I guess it was a type of epiphany as far as me making that decision, but I really can't. It's not something I would recommend to anyone, and it's certainly I can't say that I would do things differently. But as time goes by, I'm glad that I did. It's like I never look. Rarely do I look back and say, "Oh man, I really blew that one."
On a much smaller level, I had a similar thing when I stopped playing flugelhorn. Because they would, a lot of gigs, you're supposed to play trumpet and flugelhorn. And I just was like, okay, I'm going to be a one-horn person and just play the trumpet. And then they would call and they'd say, oh, come on, man, just bring your flugelhorn. It's the same thing. And I'd be like, yeah, exactly. It's the same thing. So why don't you just let me play? But that's a little different than in your case.
It's more difficult for me to make the same thing argument.
Well, on some level it is. But you're... I mean, that's, I would say, a courageous, creative decision to say, no, I'm going to do this thing that's going to limit some options that have been open to me in order to go to this deeper search. And I mean, there's a philosophical aspect to that. And, anyone who doesn't know Sam Newsome's Twitter feed, there's endless inspiration and thoughts about creativity and philosophy, absolutely. And what it is to be an artist, and, why one does what one does. So maybe all of this is part of that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think playing the soprano has made me think about music in a more philosophical way for no other reason that I didn't really have a lot of support. So in many ways, I had to be my own cheering squad. So this was, as I always tell people when they tell me about a Twitter post that they liked that was inspirational, and I always like, I'm actually preaching to myself. A lot of times I'm posting these things because these are ideas that I'm wrestling with, and also so I won't forget them. For myself, if I want to go back later on and kind of revisit that thought, but that does make sense.
Well, also that you're a committed educator. That you're at Long Island University, and so I don't know if that brings more weight to it, but it's more like you're speaking to
absolutely.
A younger generation of musicians, and who are all going to do their own thing. But to be inspired by somebody that's made those tough creative decisions and lived by them is really something.
When I think where I teach at Long Island University, it's unique in that I primarily teach music appreciation students. I mean, and this is certainly something that's been gradual over the years.
Can I come? I'm a music appreciator.
Oh, you'll be bored out of your wits. But so what that has done, I primarily make my living as a lecturer. So I'm sort of taking various musical topics, and I've had to learn how to break music down into like very fundamental, very rudimental elements so that non-music majors or people who have not had the intense musical training that I've had or, aspiring music students have had. So be able to break it down into those very easy to understand elements certainly has helped me as an artist, because I always feel like for my own creativity, if I can understand it on a simple level or a rudimentary level, then as far as making it more complicated, I mean, to me, that's the easy part. I think having a clear understanding, a clear vision, I think that's the most difficult part, because I always feel if you can see it, if it's clear, then it's just a matter of implementing the steps to get there.
Yeah, but that clarity is profound. And to be able to break it down into those elements is something that I think any musician is going to benefit from. Oh. And that you're saying you're only speaking to people who aren't really in the field.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
I feel like that's the crux of just creativity and being a musician, is being able to look at something and
because I'm actually when I do speak at master classes for music majors or even up and coming professionals, I'm able to speak with a certain clarity because it becomes easier, because I can go back and forth between more technical language and then kind of more commonplace language. So it becomes, I can get them on both ends of the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So bringing us back to chaos theory, then let's leave the title alone for now and just talk about, you're creating all of the music out of sounds that you make with the soprano saxophone. And you're recording it yourself.
Yes.
And layering and overdubbing.
Yeah.
And it's comes out of a process that you've been developing over many years. Would you say that chaos theory is kind of like the culmination of all that work for you?
Yeah, each album that I record is a culmination of things that I've been working on, oftentimes for the past year and a half, or sometimes 2 years.
No, that makes sense. I guess I meant more in the sense of the way you're talking about music to those classes in terms of, taking complex ideas and breaking them down into
absolutely.
simple elements.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because within each of those things that I'm doing on the album, I mean, it's certainly very simple, maybe in the way that I'm thinking about it, but certainly the process through which I bring it to fruition can get very complicated, but I tend not to think of it in those terms. It's really, I try to keep it simple.
What is it? So Chaos Theory #1 has the subtitle Brewing.
Yeah. Well, that comes from when I listen back to it, it just sounds like something is about to happen. There's all of these different kind of sounds that are kind of trying to find some type of congruity, with each other. So you got this kind of tension going on. So to me, it just gives an impression of something brewing and about to happen.
Wow. That's cool. Because then this next one is called Entrapment. It's Chaos Theory #3, part of this suite of pieces that are part of this record. So how did the name Entrapment come to you?
I would have to hear it, unfortunately.
Well, let's listen to some. Here we go. Chaos Theory #3, Entrapment.
Well, with that particular piece, and as with all of the others, as you will hear on the album, there are many different parts that are layered together, and we didn't really talk about this yet, but one of the unique things about the record is that, it's called Chaos Theory Songs Cycles for Prepared Saxophone. So the way that I prepared the saxophone was that I put tube extensions on the instrument as a way of elongating, I guess, the standing sound wave, which results in getting a much lower sounding instrument. So I have different lengths of tubes that I use on the recordings, and even when I'm overdubbing, so you'll have maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different prepared versions of the soprano, all kind of, intermingling. So with the entrapment, I guess the way I envisioned it, you as with all of the pieces, there's some part that hovers over, as you might say, the primary melodic line, and then there's these other sort of abstract kind of complementary parts. So I guess with the entrapment, you kind of hear this melody kind of hovering over, but then there's something about the abstraction that's kind of pulling it back, but then there's kind of this tug of war of being amongst the chaos and then hovering above it.
I have a lot of questions. So first of all, are you using they're like clear plastic tubes? You using them on every track on the album?
For the most part. I mean, I think there's maybe 2 tracks where that does not happen.
Okay.
Because I guess the way that the whole process is, there are basically 2 different two diameters. You have one, I consider it to be I guess I call it the outer layer, and this is the tube that attaches to the neck of the soprano. And then there's another tube that where I consider it the sort of the inner layer that goes inside of the outer layer. And then on that tube, I had my repairman put a cork so that I could firmly place the mouthpiece of the soprano on that. So for each outer layer and inner layer tube, there are different lengths. So so the creative process just become finding, just various lengths that, sometimes I don't even know what it's going to be. I just kind of, whatever comes out, I just deal with it.
Yeah.
And what comes out changes, sometimes the reed size affected, sometimes maybe the room, or maybe how I'm hearing it. So like sometimes you get into a mindset of, I want something that's more conventional as far as just like, okay, this is a clear tone. And then sometimes with certain tube combinations between the outer and inner, it doesn't give me anything like that. It could only give me sort of, I guess, what could be categorized as noise. And sometimes that might be where my mindset is. So that I'll go with that. So
and
I'd
imagine also that because of these tubes, the sound is coming from a different place than it would be if you were just playing the traditional soprano sax, right?
When you say coming from a different place, what do you mean?
Like where the sound is emerging might be 3 feet further away from your head, or might be closer to your ear.
Yeah.
And then the vibration of the mouthpiece of the reed is also giving you a different resonance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and plus reacting to the previous tracks that you've laid down, I'd imagine would also be a part of your.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the cool thing about this record, and I guess the 2 previous records, Soprano Bill and The Straight Horn of Africa, like going into it, I had no idea of what I was going to record. I knew I had things that I was working on, but how it would culminate into a tune and then a full-length CD, that part remained a mystery. It really wasn't until you sit down really with the engineer, the mixing and mastering session, that you're like, okay, I think I have something I'm ready to put out now. Because usually
this record came about that way also?
Absolutely.
So you go in and it's an improvisatory sort of way of making it.
Exactly. The whole thing is improvise, and then it just gets to the point it's done over several sessions, and then as I get to the point where it just feels like it's complete, then I'll just, I usually work with Peter Carl.
Okay.
So I'll just say, Peter, I usually send him email. I say, I think I'm almost done, so let's do one more session, and then I think that's going to be it. And then I usually go to Katsuhiko Naito for the mixing and mastering. So that's for the past, I don't know, 6-7 years. Like that's been the process.
Good process.
Yeah.
Wow. And you're pretty much like in terms of your own music, you're doing this exclusively.
Yeah.
In terms of your own composition, improvising, playing, developing your sound. I mean, it's a big transition, it sounds to me, especially from how you were playing when we met.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you said something about, with all of these preparations of the instrument, sometimes you're not really able to get like, I think the words you said was like a clear, pure soprano sax tone.
Absolutely.
And then there's a series of songs on the album that are just called solo number one, Naked Truth. I thought I would play a little bit. Yeah. And it sounds to me like that is, in fact, just the soprano sax. Yeah. And you're playing solo. And is that part of the same process that you're improvising these things and coming up with?
Absolutely. Well, I guess Naked Truth, if my memory serves me correctly, what's unique about that track is that's another thing that I do is I attach chimes to the neck strap holder, and what that does, like the chimes, there's a you might call it a what's the term I'm looking for? But there are these spontaneous melodies that are created just by the chimes ringing. So what I'm responding to are the I guess whatever melodies or rhythmic patterns that ensue as a result of me actually moving the soprano back and forth. I guess moving the chimes in a very deliberate way.
You can hear that on this track.
So that's sort of like where the improvisation or the spontaneity or the freshness is coming from.
Let's hear a little bit of that. It's solo number one, Naked Truth. That's a beautiful track, Sam.
Thank you.
So you were saying as we were hearing that, it's not the one with the chimes.
Yeah.
So I was saying, well, I'll just tell everyone they should go out and get this record, Chaos Theory, so they can hear the one with the chimes. you're moving around, but you did also say that's the only track on the record where you're playing pure, straight soprano saxophone.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes, for the past couple of records, I have to remind myself that there are people who will buy my records and they still want to hear soprano. And I do too. So I have to sometimes forget not to do the obvious, which is not to play something, always play the soprano in this heavily prepared state, that sometimes just playing it in its pure
But do you think
state.
that those people that you feel, maybe they're imaginary people, but as you're playing, it's like none of us exist in a vacuum, right? So on some level, there's somebody out there for you that you think thinks that. And I'm sure there are people. And I guess my question is like, do you feel like that's something that's tied to your long history in the music? Like, for example, that you were with Terence Blanchard's band for a long time, right?
Yeah, I guess 4 years, maybe 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were, well, let's just put it this way, a very different musician than you are now. Mm-hmm. And maybe that what you're thinking about what those people would think would be like, oh, I want to hear the way Sam played back then.
Well, I actually was not referring to people that were part of that musical circle that I was a part of in the 90s, or even when I was playing more conventional conventional tenor saxophone. I was thinking, I'm talking about even like the improvised music, like noise geeks, who might actually want to hear me playing the soprano in an unprepared state, in addition to the other stuff. And not just for them, but me, myself included. I don't want to get lost in the concept and sort of not present sort of a complete musical picture of what I do, because this is a part of what I do. Because you can get into a thing, you're so focused on this one idea that you actually forget there are other aspects to what you do. So that's what I was referring to, not to appease the Terence Blanchard WBGO crowd.
Appease. I didn't mean it like that, but I'm curious as to who these free jazz freaks are. But no. Send your emails to Sam at Newsome. No,
but to activate, I do have there's a network of soprano saxophonists that I have befriended. Some of them I came across from my blog, Soprano Sax Talk. Mm-hmm. And, they're, my sources of inspiration. And, I might be inspiration for them as well. A lot of times I would interview them on my blog to get them to talk about their relationship with the soprano saxophone and their process. So it is creating a type of musical family. So I'm speaking in terms of those people who are part of, I guess you can call them my inner circle.
But you're also, more recently, you had that band Global Unity. For a good number of years, I was going to play something from that, a beautiful soprano solo that you played. And what year would this be from? The Wedding March?
That was 2001.
That's a great solo. 2001.
Yeah, a long time ago. Doesn't feel like it. Really, it feels like, I don't want to say yesterday, but maybe last week.
Well, we were talking about soprano saxophone blogs and soprano saxophone talk, and did you meet Steve Lacy? You must have, right?
I did not. That's one of my regrets. I did go to a gig that he did at Sweet Basil, or maybe it was called Sweet Rhythm at the time. He had just relocated to the United States. He was at NEC,
in Boston, New England
and
Conservatory,
and he was doing a duo gig with Danilo Perez. So for some reason, he just seemed to be bugged. I don't know if he was just on. Maybe
he was a pretty dry guy.
Yeah,
but I'm sure he would have. I'm sure he would have been, overjoyed to meet you and talk about. I mean, he had that same passion for the instrument.
Yeah, but I won't. But
and you've read his book, I'm sure, of the findings.
Definitely. Definitely.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm saying we didn't get a chance to connect, and then it wasn't long after that he passed away. So I don't know. I was like, man, I don't want this to happen again. So I started thinking about like other people that I wanted to connect with. And so that's when I actually reached out to Dave Liebman, because I was like, he was another person that I admired on the soprano, and I didn't know him. And I was like, I want to start reaching out to these people who've been doing it, who've sort of paved the way,
Was Yusef Lateef a big patron of the soprano? I guess maybe not as much.
Not as much. I mean, he did some interesting things.
Yeah.
I think certainly sort of putting the soprano saxophone playing it in kind of a world music like context. So I mean, he was certainly, because I think his approach was almost oboe-like, because he also played the oboe.
Yeah.
So I haven't heard a lot of what he did, but the stuff I have heard, I like very much.
What about Evan Parker?
Oh,
did you ever talk to him?
I've sent him emails. I did reach out to him, but we've never. I went to one gig that he did in New York a while ago, but he's not here very often.
Right.
So when I'm able to, I try to go and just try to connect. But but I certainly have not had any type of long sit down or hang with him.
I just feel like I'm going to that soprano saxophone place, but it's like the music that you're making, it's almost maybe the instrument isn't even as important at this point.
Yeah.
Since you're reinventing it every time, and it's more about the sound and the construction. But I was thinking about, other antecedents. Of course, there's John Coltrane. But I wonder, like, you've used the term avant traditionalist. So I wonder if you think about Sidney Bechet in that way, or some of the other earlier, even, clarinet, soprano, sax voices.
Do I think of them as being avant traditionalists, or?
No, do you think of them in terms of how you see your path and your lineage and your connection to the traditions of the music?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's one of the things that might be different about me versus someone like Michel Donata. I don't know if you know him. He's a French soprano saxophonist.
Not personally, no.
Brilliant. He's someone who's, not only is he committed to the soprano, but he's committed to experimental music. I don't even know he's ever even played like traditional jazz as we know it. So, like, what makes me different from someone like him is that my connection to the history of the music is much broader. So I am coming out of Sidney Bechet. There is a Lucky Thompson influence. There is certainly a Wayne Shorter influence. There's a Dave Liebman influence. There's a who is this other? Of course, Evan Parker, and then there's like other sort of European improvisers that have been huge influences on me. So I'm drawing from many different sources. So I'm kind of, I guess, when I'm filtering it out, is maybe certainly in the solo context is coming through in an abstract context, but you might say the ingredients that go into the filter are coming from a much broader spectrum of the music.
Yeah, I mean, I can hear that. I think that for listeners that I've heard reactions from, sometimes it's hard for people to hear the connections to the history of the music.
Yeah.
If a music is maybe more experimental, or maybe I don't like the word experimental, but personal. Mm-hmm. Right? You're going out of your way, and it's part of your philosophy, from what I can understand, to find this truly personal way to get inside expression and get the music out. Mm-hmm. And that has connections to your feelings about the tradition, but also your feeling about the world as a creative artist and about the environment that we're in making this music.
Yeah, absolutely. I always feel that as artists, our work is kind of a two-sided coin. On one side, you have the reflection of the things that are around you, and then on the other side, you have sort of a projection of how you envision the world to be, or at least how you envision your music to be. And I guess for me, it's kind of like that, because certainly as far as the reflection, I'm influenced by just being in New York. It's like just being in New York, you're constantly you're exposed to not only cross-culturalism, but you're also very much influenced by a lot of noise. Mm. My wife and I joke about this. Like sometimes, we'll open up the window, we'll hear like someone working on the street and like a jackhammer, and it sounds like a multiphonic, mm-hmm. or horns, being sounded at the same time. There's a certain kind of abstraction that's within that you hear in an urban city that you would not hear in the country. Certainly. Yeah. So I feel like my music is a reflection of all that, and certainly Global Unity was that. People used to say it was world music or cross culture music, but I used to say, it's actually New York music, mm-hmm. because the music is a result of me just having been attuned to what was happening around me, and sort of have somehow to be able to synthesize that into this musical concept.
Wow. So I just want to mention your wife is the violinist Megakura.
Yes.
And you both have a beautiful 8-year-old daughter.
Yes.
And I'm like really happy to hear that when you open the window and hear those sounds, that you can both relate on that level.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
That's so much of where the music comes from is the sound world that's around all of us at all times.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as musicians, because we're conservatory trained, we tend to have a sort of I guess I call it a 12-tet perspective, 12 tones of equal temperament. But, it's much more vast than that. It's like life is music, when it comes right down to it.
Yeah, definitely every moment, mm-hmm. for sure. I'm going to pivot to the more technical, nerdy thing before we finish. Just because it sounds like to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that beyond just the extensions of plastic tubing and modifications to the instrument, there's also a lot of what we'd call extended techniques, mm-hmm. that one might use on the unprepared soprano saxophone, if you will. So like slap tonguing?
Yeah.
You doing that?
Yep.
And that's like when you forcibly put your tongue against the reed, right? Is that?
Yeah, I guess
I'm not a saxophone player, so you have to excuse me.
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because a lot of times when critics or journalists, I should stop calling them critics. When jazz journalists...
I like to say writers.
Okay.
Try to just take all judgment out of it.
When writers are writing about my music, a lot of times they will describe it as me clicking the keys together, and that's usually very frustrating because that's a very different process
and a very different sound, right?
Yeah, it's a very different sound. But slap tonguing, because the way that I do it is called a pitch slap tongue. So you're hearing the percussive quality, but then there is an identifiable pitch. And as far as how you produce the sound, you put the tongue on the reed, and you create a suction. And then as you lift the tongue off the reed, you get this clicking
the air
sound.
rushing through in the other direction.
Yes,
the
exactly.
reed.
So it's almost like when you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth.
Yeah.
You make that clucking sound.
Yeah.
It's the same process, only done on the reed.
So what's that language that uses that
percussive
sound?
slap tongue.
Xhosa.
Oh yeah, South Africa, yeah.
So I'm surprised there's not more like incredible saxophonists coming. Maybe there are, and I'm just not aware.
Yeah, I never thought about that actually.
So, okay, that demystifies it for me. So now, like multiphonics, you do a lot of, and you do them in different ways with different uses. Sometimes it's clearly 2-3 pitches.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more like I don't want to say an effect, but like a sonic, almost like a buzzing or I don't like the word noise in this context, but it's not so much about 2 pitches, but more about a texture, let's say.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
a timbre.
Yep. That's a great way to put it. Because I guess the way I look at multiphonics, I mean, I use them in 2 different ways. As you said, I have analyzed them at certain points, and some of them come out to be these, I guess you would call incomplete triads with extensions. So they could have various usages. So I have some that sound in that way, and then there are some that the pitches are very close together. So it does come off as a type of texture, and certainly I personally don't have a problem with the term noise. I mean, I embrace it. Actually, I use it as a force for good. So I have those 2 different ways that I approach them. There's, I guess you might call them the conventional usage of them, and then I guess more of the textual. I mean, maybe not even conventional, but a harmonic usage, and then there's also a textural usage.
And a melodic usage.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
On some of these tracks, it sounds like, you're creating extra melodies. We were listening before, and I was like, I can't remember which piece it was, but I was thinking to myself, oh, it's kind of like Monk. And it was just because there was a very simple, pure melody that was above maybe a more complex construction.
Right. Yeah,
that
I understand.
you were laying up there with a multiphonic. And
it's kind of funny when you mention multiphonics. I was immediately drawn to Monk's music when I was thinking of ways to use them in a more of a conventional context. I mean, I'm less preoccupied with that now, but certainly when I first started doing it, practicing those things, I wanted to find some lineage, a way to sort of mix sort of these I guess extended techniques with more conventional melodic sounds, or just a conventional jazz vocabulary. So it was just something about his music that seemed to lend itself to using multiphonics, because I think there's certainly the way that he played chords, there was a certain dissonance, and then also there was the consonants too. So he was a master at sort of negotiating the 2, and I can relate to that playing multiphonics, because as I try to negotiate between sort of the harmonic and the textural usages of them, Monk's music sort of was a great vehicle for using those as a platform for those types of sounds.
Well, it's interesting because I was going to go out with this track that I think, in the way that you're talking about Monk, and I think not only, did his textures and harmonies set up those things, but also in a rhythmic way. The rhythmic accents in his music come together in an interesting way. And so I was going to play your piece, Urban Locomotion, that relates to opening the window in the city, first of all.
Right.
But second of all, I don't know if it's multiphonics on this track or so much as just juxtapositions of different rhythms, of different timbral sounds together that create this underlying rhythmic propulsion that I think is really beautiful.
Oh, great. Thank you.
It's been great talking to you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
I feel like I'm leaving so much out. What am I forgetting here? Oh, I didn't mention stand-up comedy.
Oh, right.
You don't do that anymore?
No, I have. It's kind of funny. Occasionally, my wife would ask me to MC an event. So in those instances,
you'd write some new bits.
I'll write some jokes. But I haven't done that in a while. And that's something I did when I first moved to New York. Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but certainly, so they were kind of moving in parallel with each other. Jazz was experienced a resurgence during the late 80s, early 90s. And so was stand-up comedy. I mean, there were just as there were a lot of clubs that were, springing up, there were also a lot of jazz clubs that were hosting music. There was a lot of stand-up clubs. And then there were also a lot of open mics. And that's what I used to do. I consider myself more so than a stand-up, an open micer. So these, that's when you go to these open mic sessions and you try out material. So I did that for a few years. And then I stopped just because it was just the mental energy that it took, it's because you could be crafting a joke or a bit that might take 60 seconds to execute, but you have to work it out for maybe days or weeks. So it's just a lot of mental energy that I couldn't divide myself up in that way.
Right. But I also read in your bio that you're also a balloon sculptor.
That is
maybe it's less stressful than open mic.
Yes, I only make a fool of myself at home with the balloon sculptures.
It was funny though, because when I read that, I was immediately thinking of the squeaking balloon, the noise that a balloon makes when you sculpt with it, and I was like, oh, I better go back to the record and see it.
Well, actually, I started integrating balloons into what I do after I made this recording.
Wow.
So
maybe on the next one.
Yeah, definitely.
We'll get some balloons.
Oh yeah, I mean balloons have become sort of central to what I do now. Kind of interesting. It's kind of, I don't know why, but it's like after sculpting him for so long, I just had an idea of actually, I think from the noise aspect of it, there's a certain squeakiness that you picked up on, and then also what I started doing, I put things inside of it like rice or even like small beans, and it makes for an interesting kind of rattling sound. It's very unique. So it kind of ties into the technique I use with the chimes, where I attach the chimes and I respond to whatever rhythms or melodies that happen as a result of me moving the chimes. So the same thing happens with the balloons. By me putting things inside, there's a certain sonic space that's created that's very unique to things being inside of a balloon.
Yeah. Wow, I'll look forward to hearing that. Is that coming soon?
I haven't put it into the context of a recording, but it's just something that I do. I mean, I post these things on YouTube and Facebook and sometimes Twitter. Like a lot of times when I have ideas, the same is when I tweet things. Like now I've gotten to the point, like even when I have musical ideas, I'll just videotape it and then I'll upload it and just kind of see how people respond. Okay. And also it's even for me as well.
Should go find all these all these platform Sam Newsome output. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, man,
for talking to me.
thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, for me as well. So we'll go out with Urban Locomotion from the Chaos Theory album.